So today we are going to discuss The Unknown Citizen, a very significant poem by W.H. Auden. W.H. Auden, as you know, is considered to be one of the greatest poets of the 20th century. He was born in England, but later he went to America and became an American citizen. Most of Auden's writings were composed in 1930s. The literary scene in the 30s was marked by the appearance of a group of young poets who gained an immediate acceptance. They achieved a very wide reputation as a school of modern poetry. Outstanding among them were W.H. Auden, Louis Macnish, Stephen Spender, and Cecil Day Lewis. They all came of upper-class intellectuals, and they all received costly education. These poets are as a whole referred to as the 30s poets, or the poets of the 30s. The chief among them was W.H. Auden. This group of poets is therefore often called the Auden group. The 1930s were an interwar period. The after effects of the First World War plunged the entire Europe in gloom. What was worse, Europe and America suffered severe economic depression in 1930s, which is called the Great Depression. The Great Depression started in the United States after a major fall in stock prices in 1929. Worldwide GDP fell by an estimated 15%. Cities around the world were hit hard, especially those dependent on heavy industry. The people were groaning under cruelty, oppression, and social injustice. There was a feeling of dejection all around. Auden, who was trying to make his mark as a poet, naturally became interested in the condition of the people. Some writers of the time became interested in Marxism that explains how capitalist mode of production creates all types of social inequalities. Auden also saw a ray of hope in this ideology. Being inspired with Marxist ideas, Auden was strongly against the doctrine of art for art's sake and what he called luxury poetry. Luxury poetry, like other cultural institutions, function as a superstructure that helps to sustain certain patterns of thought. This system of thought legitimizes and naturalizes inequality and oppression. Auden was convinced that post-war civilization was disintegrating. So he thought that it was his moral duty to protect the civilization from all sorts of oppressions. And so he decided to employ his art in the service of society. A spokesman of the masses, Auden showed clearly in his poetry a faith in violent social upheaval as a means to a better order. Yet he was outspokenly anti-romantic. Like others in his group, he stressed the importance of clinical and objective attitudes. Auden deliberately tried to prevent poetry from becoming exclusively highbrow, and found subjects among the everyday, often sordid realities of a diseased social order. Auden wrote The Unknown Citizen in 1939, shortly after moving from England to the United States. The poem gives evidence of his cultural shock when suddenly he was confronted with the American-style consumerism. Auden was an upholder of individual rights. He spoke for personal freedom against the oppressive mechanisms of the state. This view of Auden is clearly revealed in this particular poem. The Unknown Citizen gives an ironic representation of an average citizen in a government-controlled state. The poet intends his satire against a totalitarian socialist state that kills a person's individuality. Auden's contempt for authority surfaces strongly in this poem. He sees authority as a controlling, universalizing, dehumanizing repository of power. Allowing the government too much control is dangerous. The poem shows us how too much conformity reduces us to faceless numbers devoid of any individual thinking. Now, before we read the poem, let us focus on the title. Here, the word unknown means ordinary or obscure. In many big cities, there is a monument to the unknown soldier that stands for the thousands of unknown soldiers that die for their country. The title of Auden's poem parodies this. In those monuments, the inscriptions are like those ordinary, obscure soldiers as citizens of the state who laid down their lives for defending their motherland, wanted name and fame, but remained unknown. Thus, the unknown citizen means the ordinary average citizen in the modern industrialized urban society. He has no individuality and identity. He has no desire for self-assertion. He likes to remain unknown. In many ways, we are the simply faceless numbers to modern society, not individuals with feelings and emotions and dreams. The only way for an individual to survive in a regimented society is to conform, obey, and live in perpetual mental slavery. The subtitle to the poem is a very unusual one. The subtitle to JS07M 378, this marble monument is erected by the state, alludes to the concept enforced by the government that every human being must be classified by an alphanumeric tag to distinguish who they are, rather than being able to have their own personal identity. The poet scoffs at human beings given alphanumeric names when they are already struggling for their own personal identity in a world clustered with the advancing technology. Let us now read the poem. He was found by the Bureau of Statistics to be one against whom there was no official complaint. Here, Bureau of Statistics means a government department of statistics, an agency that keeps statistical records of the citizens of the country. So, here is a government institution that judges human beings by statistical records. This is highly absurd and ridiculous because human beings cannot be judged by statistics alone. The poet here seems to say that statistics cannot sum up an individual. Physical facts are inadequate to evaluate human happiness, for man does not live by bread alone. Auden dramatizes his theme by showing the glaring disparity between the complete statistical information about the citizen compiled by the state and the sad inadequacy of the judgments made about him. And all the reports on his conduct agree that, in the modern sense of an old-fashioned word, he was a saint. The poet here ironically says that the unknown citizen became a saint not because he searched for God, but because he served the government perfectly. He is a modern-day saint, a model citizen. He has no identity of his own, no individual self, no ability to think. He does only what is expected to from an ideal citizen as defined by the state. He simply exists to perpetuate the status quo. After his death, he is only awarded a nameless marble monument by the state for sacrificing his individuality for a greater cause. The award given to him is as cold as his lifeless existence. Now let us read the next line. For in everything he did, he served the greater community. We know that great people serve the greater community. They can go beyond their personal interests and sacrifice their lives for a greater cause. They have greater perspective and a universal understanding. Auden here ironically suggests that the unknown citizen has compromised his individuality to follow the predetermined rules of the state. He is a conformist under the surveillance of a modern bureaucratic state, which concentrates on controlling rather than exploring the possibilities of its citizens. Let us read the next lines. Except for the war, till the day he retired, he worked in a factory and never got fired, but satisfied his employers, Fuge Motors Inc. So here we find a man who never faced any objection anywhere, because he never questioned the status quo, that is, the existing state of affair, the convention or the established norms. He never contradicted with anything. He simply followed the norms slavishly, followed the order without questioning. He never applied his thinking ability because he feared social rejection. Here, Fuge Motors Inc. sounds very similar to the company Ford Motors Inc. In this time period, America was the location of many car manufacturers. Why Auden chose the word fuse is a humorous mystery. It could be that Auden, through giving the unknown citizen's job a generic name, is mocking the commercial monotony that factory work entails. Yet, he wasn't a scab or odd in his views. Here, scab means someone who works during a strike. This man works even during a strike to prove his obedience to the authority. For his union reports that he paid his dues. Our report on his union shows it was sound. So he works during strikes to please his master, but at the same time he also pays the dues for his union so as not to offend the leaders. So he is a man of herd mentality. He compromises with any situation and goes always with the flow. And our social psychology workers found that he was popular with his mates and liked to drink. So here we see that even the psychologists and the social workers replicate the same capitalist project. They also fail to recognize the emotional crisis because they also base their study on statistical records. The press are convinced that he bought a paper every day and that his reactions to advertisements are normal in every way. Policies taken out in his name prove that he was fully insured, and his health card shows he was once in a hospital but left it cured. Both producers, research, and high-grade living declare he was fully sensible to the advantages of the installment plan and had everything necessary to the modern man: a phonograph, a radio, a car, and a Frigidaire. Here, phonograph means gramophone. Frigidaire is an American commercial brand that developed the first self-contained refrigerator. Here we see that the state looks upon its citizens merely as consumers. Their freedom and happiness are judged by their ever-expanding consumption of goods. In a consumerist society, money seems to set the standards for human happiness. The capitalist economy creates illusions about itself. The workers are under the illusion that they are free and unexploited. They are also under the illusion that the money has the power of its own. This is called Fetishism. When there was peace, he was for peace. When there was war, he went. So, here it means that he didn't hold his personal views on anything. He has no desire for self-assertion. He was married and added 5 children to the population. Marriage is defined by the economists as complementary productive human capital. Marriage builds family, which is first and foremost about economic production. In feudal system, families were little tiny farms, usually with dad as CEO and everyone else as an employee. Marriage was about how well you could produce together, producing more children to ensure the labor your farm required. In a capitalist society, the family became the center of consumption, with husband and wife as shared consumption activities, which our eugenist says was the right number of a parent of his generation. Here, eugenist means one who supports selective breeding, that is, attempts to improve the quality of a particular human race by reproducing the same race and preventing other races from reproducing. This notion of selective breeding is a weapon of capitalism against humanity. Similar to eugenics, capitalism also requires a systematic ladder of people at the top and people at the bottom. And our teachers report that he never interfered with their education. All institutions of the state have given him a clean cheat. The poem, however, ironically suggests that he compromised everything to be deemed as good citizen. Educational system is a powerful superstructure that helps to legitimize the interest of a capitalist state. This unknown citizen never interfered with whatever he was taught by the teachers at school. This means that he was a good student of a capitalist state. Was he free? Was he happy? The question is absurd. The agency, which is content with the empirical evidence, cannot answer these central questions. No government statistics can ever answer these kinds of questions. By asking these questions, the poet is drawing our attention to the question of freedom and happiness. The poet ironically suggests that the modern man is slave to routine and he is incapable of understanding such concepts of freedom and happiness. Therefore, such a question in this context would be absurd. Thus, this poem is a bitter attack on modern society, its indifference towards individuality and identity. The only way of an individual to survive in a regimented society is to conform, obey, and live in a perpetual mental slavery. This unknown citizen is utterly devoid of any urge for self-assertion. This statement shows that even though the government knows all statistics and facts going on in one's life, they don't know the actual feeling or meaning in one's life. Now we come to the last line of the poem. Had anything been wrong, we should certainly have heard. So you see that in many ways we are simply faceless numbers to modern society, not individuals with feelings and emotions and dreams. Auden, being a modernist, is concerned with this modern idea of people losing their identities in the face of changing technological world. In this poem, Auden thus speaks of the dangers of modern society to the individual, including anonymity, conformity, and government control. It is a satire of standardization at the expense of individualism. With dark humor, Auden challenges the authority and their way of judging people's life based on statistical findings. Now, before we end our discussion, we must examine a very important issue which is addressed in this poem. We have discussed that this satirical poem is a harsh criticism of modern bureaucracy, capitalism, socialism, and conformity. But this poem is also an indirect criticism of heterosexism. Auden frequently used indirection in his poetry to mask his homosexuality, which was still a crime in England. Auden maintained a lasting sexual relationship with Christopher Isherwood, a well-known contemporary writer. They used to frequent a local gay bar. While in America, he fell in love with Chester Coleman, a young man who had turned up to attend one of his lectures. Their relationship lasted till Auden's death. However, Auden knew that neither he nor any gay person could feel happy or free conforming to the heterosexual norms of the greater community. He must sacrifice or hide his sexual choice to serve the purpose of the state and thereby remain an unknown citizen, a faceless number, never being able to express his individual choices, never having the right to be odd in his views. A totalitarian state based on statistical records only take into account the greater community and never approve of any odd views or choices. They only consider information which are favorable to their interest. So here we end our discussion today. Thank you all.